Off with Monuments Men. It was co-written and directed by George Clooney. Now, the Allies may have won World War II, but the Nazis certainly managed to steal an awful lot of European art, didn't they?
They certainly did. And Monuments Men is based on the incredible true story of a special unit of primarily American soldiers trained in art and architecture, endeavoring to track down art stolen by the Nazis and, if possible, return it to its rightful owners. Now, Clooney has a wonderfully talented cast, but the film should be told artfully, and it isn't. It's just needlessly clunky. The dialogue is awkward. Things are either spelled out, they hit you over the head, or they leave them vague. It can't decide whether it's a comedy or a drama. It should be suspenseful, but most of the time it just sort of sits there, flat and underwhelming. But George Clooney's intentions were definitely good. And here he is explaining to us why he decided to bring the story to the screen now.
So you want to go into a war. We do like to tell World War II stories, but I thought this was sort of a fascinating piece of history that people didn't really know, and it's gotten lost over the years, and I thought it'd be interesting to bring it back up and talk about it.
So, Lisa, we shouldn't rush out to see it.
You know, if you got something else to do, it's almost impossible to recommend, and yet Clooney is no dummy, despite its many, many flaws. The film is actually doing very well in the U.S. and abroad, but you'd be much better off reading a book about the real Monuments Men and women, or seeing one of the 4 previous films directed by George Clooney, because this is his first dud. And because we're in France, I should point out that France's Jean Dujardin is actually one of the best things about it, as a brave Frenchman willing to put his life on the line for art. The film asks, unsubtly, whether a piece of art can ever be worth more than a single human life. And that is a profound question, but this, unfortunately, is a pretty superficial film.
And having seen it myself in Madrid, I have to agree with you there, Lisa. I was very disappointed. Now, moving on to France's Minister of Culture, who recently returned some stolen art to the heirs of the people it was confiscated from during the war. Stolen artworks keep turning up, don't they?
Absolutely. That's what makes the story so pertinent. Many of the original owners did not survive the war, alas, but much of the art did. A phenomenal cache of valuable art was found just a few months ago in an apartment in Germany that nobody knew about. 103 Torah scrolls were ferreted out in Russia. When we think of art, we think of paintings and sculpture, but here in Paris, Cinémathèque Française founder Henri Langlois also managed to rescue hundreds of movies from the Nazis during the occupation.
Now, you recently returned from Lyon, where the 16th edition of the cartoon movie was held. This has something to do with adults watching cartoons.
Yes, and that's harder than it sounds. 750 grown-ups from 40 countries in Europe and beyond converged on Lyon for 3 days of presentations about feature films European animators would like to make or are in the process of making, one frame at a time. And since this forum started in 1999, audiences for European animation have increased tenfold, from about 20 million to 220 million viewers.
What can we look forward to then?
Well, it's really hard to whittle down 60 projects, but more than ever, animation is not just for kids. Over half a dozen hard-hitting projects dealt with things like war, refugees, identity. Among those, a standout for me was a project called Chris the Swiss. When the director was a young girl, her cousin went off to cover the war in Yugoslavia as a journalist, and he died there in January of 1992. So some 20 years later, she tries to get to the bottom of what actually happened to him. It's a mixture of real footage and animation. Let's watch.
It's a story full of mystery, secrets, and darkness.
Alles in allem war er 3 Mal in Kroatien. Da hat er gesagt, ich soll auch kommen. Und das hat im Krieg, das sind schon die wahren Geschichten.
Lisa, you were telling me that the presentation in Lyon was incredibly moving. Film goers and filmmakers had tears in their eyes. Why is that?
I still get choked up when I think about this presentation. The film has a Croatian co-producer, and the way he got involved in this is an incredible stroke of fate. He sent an employee to a film co-production market in Leipzig, and when she returned, he asked, hey, did you see anything that might be interesting? And she said, no, not really. And he decided to look at the catalog for himself anyway, just to be sure, and was shocked to see his own real-life story staring back at him, because it turns out that during the war, he had worked as a fixer for foreign journalists, and that he had been the driver for the filmmaker's cousin when Chris the Swiss got killed. And he admitted to us that the guy's death hadn't mattered to him much at the time because this was, quote, just another foreign guy who came to my country, end quote, and also because a good friend of his had recently been killed doing this job. But obviously Chris the Swiss stuck with him, and now he's committed to helping tell the story.
Speaking of being haunted by something, there's a film in the works called Ghosts of Père Lachaise.
Yes, this is a terrific-sounding French project in which a girl who lives next to the famous Paris cemetery, where Jim Morrison and Edith Piaf and Molière and Oscar Wilde and Chopin are buried, goes in at night on a dare and ends up awakening the ghosts, including Chopin, who gives her private piano lessons. A surprising number of projects we saw deal with children and death. Here, the ghosts help a misfit shine at school. And really, who wouldn't want to get coached for the school play by Molière himself?
And shades of monuments men. There's even a cartoon project that's also about art theft.
Yes, it's a Hungarian project called Ruben Brandt Collector, and it's an off-kilter heist thriller. The director is a Serbian working in Berlin. So, if I understood correctly, a well-known psychiatrist who suffers from horrible migraines decides the way to treat his condition is to steal 25 paintings from the world's most famous museums. The tone and the visuals really, really make me want to see this one get made. Let's watch.
My nightmares are getting progressively worse.
Mimi, that left painting, that's a Velasquez.
Wow, nice spot.
Sooner or later, everyone stops smoking.
Our top story tonight, the so-called art collector strikes again. By now, the estimated value of stolen masterpieces has reached $2 billion.
Now, for viewers who can't wait until that gets made, any suggestions for a good film out in theatres right now?
Absolutely. Saving Mr. Banks, Dans l'ombre de Marie is the French title. Emma Thompson gives a splendid, couldn't be better performance as cranky, impossible to deal with P.L. Travers, and Tom Hanks plays Walt Disney, who spent 20 years trying to get Travers to grant him the rights to adapt her book, Mary Poppins, into a film. Mrs. Travers hated animation, and she didn't care for musicals, so I'm glad she didn't get anywhere near my childhood friend. She didn't approve of Mr. Disney. It's well written, beautifully acted, incredibly touching, old-fashioned, but in the best possible way. See it.
Great, I'll be sure to check it out. Thank you very much, Lisa. Now, Arsenal and Milan out in a crucial game for Paris Saint-Germain later. Here's the Champions League.